I have lost my memory. I remember everyone save him. I gazed at my handsome yet ill-tempered husband, who seemingly held no affection for me, and spread my hands. Let's get a divorce at some point. 1. When Siaji fetched me from the hospital, I nearly dialed the police. It was he who produced our marriage certificate that scarcely allayed my suspicions. I regarded the couple on the marriage certificate, who seemed scarcely reliant on each other, and inquired of him, "Are you truly my husband? You scarcely seem to love me." Siaji's countenance, full of vexation, froze. I presumably would not wed someone I do not love. There must be something amiss. Siaji escorted me back to our abode. The moment I opened the door, it was pitch black. Siaji even stumbled at the threshold. He grumbled to me, "Why must this place be elevated?" I had no recollection of this home and thus did not know how to respond to him. The entrance was truly too dim, and Siaji groped along the wall for an extended period yet could not locate the light switch. So Siaji queried me once more, "Where is the light?" I retorted, "Isn't this your home?" Siaji fell silent. After a protracted while, he finally discovered the switch behind the vase. The warm yellow light illuminated the entrance, seemingly dispelling the phantoms lurking in the darkness of the living room. I seemed to recall something. I remember that regardless of how late it was, the light in the entrance was always aglow, awaiting Siaji's return, just as I would always open my heart to him. I came to my senses and beheld that Siaji was clutching a note in his hand, which presumably had been torn from the switch. I took a gander and espied my handwriting thereon, which read, "Xiao Xia, congratulations on finally locating the switch." I could not help but chuckle. Was I so naive aforetime? Siaji had been observing me. Hearing this, he tossed the note aside and replied to me nonchalantly. Not only is he exceedingly childish, but also extremely jealous. I raised my eyebrows and asked him, "You have someone else on the side, right?" He choked, then demanded of me angrily, "Chen Yuan, you are feigning amnesia, aren't you? Cease being unreasonable. I do not have that much time to trifle with you." They all suspected that I was feigning amnesia. After all, I had not been in a car accident, nor had I endured a major blow. I had merely slumbered, and upon awakening, I failed to recognize Siaji. I stared at Siaji. I did not remember the person before me, and had even forgotten all my feelings for him. The heart in my bosom informed me that I had once loved him deeply. I suddenly laughed. "You feel culpable." Siaji no longer paid heed to me and strode towards the living room. The light in the living room was on the left-hand side, and Siaji could illuminate it with a casual tap. He seated himself on the warm white sofa and out of ire refrained from looking at me. I regarded the switch with curiosity. Siaji was tall, and I needed to stretch my arm to reach the place where he had casually tapped. I truly treated myself too shabbily. Siaji knitted his brows. "You did it deliberately, didn't you? I told you I do not have that much time to play with you." I perched on the small chair opposite him and glanced around. "If you lack the time, then refrain from playing." I extracted the marriage certificate Siaji had bestowed upon me previously. "Let's get a divorce sometime." Siaji did not even deign to raise his eyes and replied with great haste, fearing that I would renege. "Very well, that was what you said." I nodded. I was somewhat fatigued after remaining in the hospital for such a long time, so I asked Siaji, "Which one is my bedroom?" Siaji regarded me suspiciously, as if endeavoring to ascertain whether I was lying or had truly lost my memory. He led me to the bedroom door, then leaned against the doorframe and stared at me. I rummaged through several cabinets and ultimately located my pajamas, and simultaneously espied Siaji's. The two sets were of a couple's style, yet Siaji's set was extremely new and appeared as if he had never worn it. Nevertheless, I still folded them neatly and placed them side by side. I passed that one and retrieved a nightgown. "I am about to change attire. Do you still wish to watch here?" Siaji raised his eyebrows and then reminded me, "Do not forget to get a divorce tomorrow morning." I brandished my phone at him. "Have no concerns. I have made an appointment." He was somewhat astonished. "When did you make the appointment?" I spread my hands. "The first time I beheld you, I harbored the intention of getting a divorce." Siaji seemed exceedingly irate. He pursed his lips, knitted his brows, regarded me fixedly for a long while, but ultimately turned on his heel and departed without uttering a word. I closed the door and reclined on the soft bed. The light from the living room filtered through the gap beside the door. I arose and desired to extinguish the light. When I opened the door, I discovered that Siaji was typing on the computer in the living room. The light in the living room was cold white and fell upon Siaji's form, as if augmenting the distance between him and me. It was as if he inhabited another realm. Suddenly, he swiveled his head to look at me and inquired coldly, "Why are you not yet asleep? Do you regret it?" I placidly walked to the kitchen to pour a cup of warm water and, as I passed the refrigerator, also fetched him a bottle of coffee. He accepted the coffee suspiciously, took a sip and immediately wrinkled his nose. "Chen Yuan, what are you doing?" Well, judging from his comportment, he presumably dislikes coffee. I took a sip of warm water and said to him, "Let me sober you up." Siaji knitted his brows and glared at me. "I am already sufficiently sober." I smiled. "That is excellent. I thought you were living in a dream and could actually utter that kind of thing." Siaji pursed his lips and remained silent once more. I realized that he seemed to be deliberately eschewing an argument with me. Was he apprehensive that I would regret it? I do not recall what Siaji was like in the past. Perhaps he was high-spirited, or perhaps he was quiet and reserved. However, it ought not to be like this, which renders me feel ennui. My ennui with Siaji extended until the following morning, when he drove me to the Civil Affairs Bureau. I had risen too early and was experiencing some hypoglycemia, so I leaned against the car seat to catch a few winks. I know not when Siaji derived the interest, but he felt compelled to regale me with reminiscences of the past. He expounded on how I had courted him, how he and I had obtained the marriage certificate, and then how we had decorated the house, and he prattled on. My head ached so severely that I could not refrain from interrupting him. Since you are so loquacious, why do you not recount to me how you encountered your paramour? Siaji ceased speaking, but he also tacitly acknowledged that he had fallen for someone else. I also roughly gleaned the story of me and him from Siaji's lips. In the story, I admired him and even abased myself, like a lowly dustman gazing up at the god of faith. Now that I am liberated from the previous filter, I discovered that Siaji was so vexatious. 3. After finally entering the Civil Affairs Bureau, a young girl greeted us. She first cast a glance at Siaji and then beamed at me and said, "You too, divorces here necessitate a 30-day cooling-off period." She bestowed upon me a kind and gentle smile, yet her eyes conveyed another message to me. Do not regret it. I raised my head to look at Siaji. He was tall and long-legged, with an outstanding visage, attired in a suit and tie, and even his hair was meticulously groomed. At first blush, he was a wealthy and cultured individual. The young girl must have been mistaken. Cultured people do not necessarily engage in cultured deeds. Siaji was more impatient than I. He knitted his brows and asked, "Must I endure a cooling-off period?" The girl perused the computer and smiled. "Regrettably, sir, this is the regulation." I spread my hands to signify that I understood. Siaji sighed, retrieved our documents, and then flung a sentence at me coldly. "I have a meeting later, so I am departing first." Siaji drove away and I had to take the bus to work. Fortunately, the Civil Affairs Bureau was not far from the station. I espied the bus stop after rounding the corner and walking a few paces. The timing was inauspicious. It was precisely the rush hour. I regarded the teeming crowd before me and recoiled. When I recoiled, I nearly trod on the tail of a kitten. I apologized to the cat and raised my head to behold the cat's owner regarding me. He was presumably in his 20s, pallid with slender limbs, as if afflicted with a grave illness. He smiled with his eyes crinkled. This is the first time I have witnessed someone apologizing to a cat. I seated myself beside him, a trifle distance away from him. It is also the first time I have beheld someone walking a cat. His cat was Wuyun Takshu with a black body and 4 white paws, like donning 4 white gloves. The cat was extremely affectionate towards him, lying beside his feet, motionless. "Your cat is truly devoted to you," he smiled. "Animals possess spirits. He may also be cognizant that I am dying." I was astounded. "You are still so youthful." He raised his head to regard the sky, the light in his eyes flickering. "Being youthful is futile. It is beneficial to be alive." The consoling words hovered on the tip of my tongue, and I could not refrain from swallowing them back when I encountered the lad's gaze. The buses arrived one after another, and the number of people on the platform gradually diminished. In the end, only the 2 of us remained. The lad still regarded the sky, and the fragmented sunlight danced on his eyebrows. "Actually, I am ailing too," I said calmly. "I have lost my memory. I remember everyone, yet I have forgotten one person." After a protracted while, his placid voice wafted over. "That person is of great significance to you. Of great significance. Merely forgetting him, my heart feels as if a vast chasm has opened." The sun was shining brightly, yet I was growing colder and colder and could not refrain from huddling myself. I lied obstinately. "It matters not. I detest him." The cat rubbed against my ankle, and I could not refrain from reaching out to stroke its head. The lad regarded me askance, his eyes bright, and there was a shallow dimple on each side of his lips. He extended his hand to me. "My name is Chung Yu for long-term illness. This is my cat, and his name is Lucky. For..." Subsequently, I finally awaited the bus I desired. Before boarding the bus, Chung Yu took the initiative to exchange contact information with me. He averred that he knew a brain specialist and perhaps could introduce us to each other. I leaned against the window and ruminated all the way. When I arrived at the entrance of the studio, I failed to notice my colleague Xiao Su approaching with a wooden frame and collided with him. Xiao Su invariably dons large black-framed glasses and always keeps his head bowed to avoid conversing with people. Only when he receives his pay can you hear him murmur softly, "Thank you, boss." Although Xiao Su is extremely dejected, there is invariably a glimmer of light shining from afar in his paintings, which are always vivid and brimming with hope. I arose from the ground and hastened to check on Xiao Su. "Are you all right?" He averted his head from me and hurriedly departed with the easel. Jolie came over to examine my hands. "Your palms are all scratched, and you still have the leisure to concern yourself with others?" After all, I bumped into him first. Jolie located iodine to apply medicine to me. "A painter's hands are the most precious, and you do not cherish them." I chuckled. Jolie put away the iodine and suddenly recollected something and inquired of me. "Your husband did not make things difficult for you yesterday?" I asked. "Why should he make things difficult for me?" Jolie rolled her eyes. "Oh my heavens, everyone is aware that Xia Wangba has an arrogant disposition, believing himself to be the only one in the world. Yesterday he came to pick you up, and you upbraided him in public as a human trafficker, causing him to lose face. Did he not return and demand a divorce from you? It appears that Jolie harbors great antipathy towards Xiaji." I nodded. "We are divorced. I proposed it. I have just returned from the Civil Affairs Bureau." Jolie's eyes widened. After a long while, she clasped her hands together and prayed devoutly to the heavens. "God bless me. My birthday wish has come true. What? I was perplexed. Jolie rolled her eyes at me. My birthday wish is that I will become slender and wealthy, and Chen Yuan will be liberated from suffering. 5. Then your wish is truly prescient, I added and then asked. I cannot fathom why I would marry someone like Xie. I did love Xie. However, it would never be the Xie of the present. Something must have transpired in my forgotten memories. I regarded Jolie expectantly, hoping that she could furnish me with an answer. Jolie and I were seated adjacent to each other in high school and were in the same class during college. In the fragmented memories of my student days, Jolie was my bosom friend. Everyone suspected that I was feigning amnesia, and Jolie was no exception. However, she merely cast a few suspicious glances at me before turning to retrieve the steaming tea on the table. In the bygone days, Xie would cool this cup of tea by blowing on it and feed it to you with his own hands. After uttering these words, she poured the tea into the bucket at her feet. But now, Xie would pour out the tea without even deigning to look at you. Simultaneously with Jolie's voice resounding in my mind, some fragmented images flashed before my eyes. Xie, swathed in a thick cotton jacket, stood at the doorway downstairs, looking up at me and smiling. His lips, pallid from the cold, opened and closed yet no sound emerged. He seemed to be saying, Chen Yuanyuan, let us wed after graduation. Jolie abruptly seized my shoulders and shook me vigorously, urging me back to my senses. Chen Yuan, do not look back. The current Xie is not worthy of your retrospection. I was bewildered, yet I nodded solemnly. 6. When I emerged from work in the evening, I espied Xie awaiting me at the entrance the moment I stepped out. He stood beside the car, attired in an opulent suit, his arms folded across his chest, gazing into the distance, and I knew not what was on his mind. The dusk had descended, and he was enshrouded in gloom. Only the gentle breeze seemed to offer him some solace. Jolie pinched my arm and whispered to me, do not look back. I bestowed a smile upon her. Jolie sighed and trailed after her boyfriend. Xie seemed to have detected the commotion on our side. He snapped back to reality and regarded me with a composed tone. Get in the car. I opened the rear door and seated myself in the back. Xie merely glanced at me and remained silent. Xie and I did not exchange a single word throughout the journey, yet this silence felt oddly familiar. Observing that the surrounding scenery was growing increasingly unfamiliar, I finally could no longer contain myself and inquired, Xie, where are you taking me? Xie did not even spare me a glance and replied with a frigid countenance. Did you not mention that I would take you to partake of French cuisine every Monday? Was it an agreement between him and me in the past? I muffled my voice and said to him, I no longer have the inclination to eat. Let us return to your abode. I shall vacate the premises shortly. Xie simply parked the car by the roadside, swiveled around and stared at me with vexation. Chen Yuan, how long do you intend to make a scene? I have committed all your requests to memory. Is that not sufficient? His words kindled my ire. I snatched off my bag and hurled it at Xie's detestable visage. I am not making a scene with you. I have divorced you. Xie's countenance was as somber as ink. He opened the car window and flung the bag outside. I grew even more incensed. Xie, retrieve it for me. Xie laughed. Do you believe I am your lapdog? Are you some imperious mistress? Slap. I slapped Xie across the face. The car was suddenly plunged into silence. Xie's eyes widened in astonishment, and one side of his face gradually swelled and reddened. He presumably did not anticipate that I would strike him, yet this slap pacified both of us. Xie, marriage is a covenant between two individuals. It is not a fetter, nor is it what you term my request. It is a haven for you and me. My heart was aching. It was ostensibly I who had slapped Xie, yet I felt more pain than he. Xie turned half sideways and regarded me over his shoulder, remaining silent. Strangely, memories came crashing down upon me like a tsunami, engulfing me and leaving me gasping for breath. I suddenly recollected that when Xie was seated in front of me in high school, he often looked back at me in this manner. At that time, he raised his eyebrows and smiled with a youthful arrogance. He said, Chen Yuanyuan, when you come to watch the game in the afternoon, could you simply call my name? He said, Chen Yuanyuan, may I call you on the first snowfall day? He said, Chen Yuanyuan, you look so endearing when you frown while doing your homework. He said, Chen Yuanyuan, run boldly. Regardless of where you are, I will assuredly catch up with you. The 18-year-old seemed to always stand in the radiance, positioned where the gentle breeze blew, smiling at me ensnared in the darkness. He liked to address me as Chen Yuanyuan, claiming it would render me more charming. I would always be touched by the 18-year-old Xie, but the 28-year-old Chen Yuan will never fall in love with the 28-year-old Xie again. Xie's face was swollen on one side, and the corners of his eyes were also tinged red. I opened the car door and departed, unwilling to cast another glance at him. Inside the car, Xie's outstretched hand trembled and fell. This is the price time has exacted from him. I will not look back, and Xie is not worthy of my retrospection. That night, I moved out of Xie's abode. He inquired with a sullen visage. Are you so impatient? I was too indolent to even look at him as I lugged the suitcase. Every second counts. Xie ceased speaking and silently switched on the light in the entrance hall for me. When I dragged my luggage to the door, he suddenly called out to me in a tremulous voice. Chen Yuanyuan. I halted in my tracks. Xie was proud. He lowered his head and entreated me in an almost pleading tone. If we were to revert to a decade ago, would you? The only response he received was the resounding slam of the door. 7. On Wednesday, I accepted Chung Yu's invitation and proceeded to the hospital to consult the brain specialist. The specialist's clinic evoked a strangely familiar sensation within me, yet it was my maiden visit here, and I could not help but feel perplexed. The man seemed to discern my thoughts, fetched a cup of warm water, and proffered it to me, soothing me with a mellifluous voice. Do not be apprehensive. My name is Emoku. I minored in psychology and am proficient in influencing individuals through the environment. I regarded him with bewilderment. The man before me smiled benignly. Although he was a stranger, he imparted a sense of familiarity. Have I beheld you somewhere aforetime? He seated himself opposite me, interlaced his fingers and smiled at me with ease. I was endowed with a photographic memory. Miss Chun, we surely have not crossed paths. His voice was measured, and there was an inexplicable air of certitude. My vision gradually blurred and ultimately I only faintly heard him say, Miss Chun, I hope you do not rue your decision. When I emerged from the clinic in a daze, Chung Yu was awaiting me at the entrance. Upon seeing me exit, he returned my backpack and mobile phone to me. Are you faring well? I leaned against the wall and forced a smile at him. I felt as if I had forgotten something, yet I could not fathom what it was. Chung Yu accompanied me to recuperate in the hospital for an extended period before I finally regained my senses. Although my head still throbbed, I could finally ambulate normally. Chung Yu and I bade farewell at the entrance. He waved at me and turned to depart. I was somewhat abashed. I entreated you to accompany me all this way. How about I treat you to a repast? Chung Yu smiled. There is no need. You have already requited me. I was astounded. He added. In the recesses of your forgotten memories, we were erstwhile friends. On the way back, I was still ruminating on Chung Yu's words, endeavoring strenuously to recall if I had truly beheld him somewhere. Owing to my excessive cogitation, I inadvertently sketched Chung Yu's likeness when I was engaged in sketching. Jolie swiveled her chair around and taunted me. Surely, you can depict a comely lad based on a mere bottle. What? A second spring. I promptly refuted. Of course not. He is merely 20 years old. Jolie clicked her tongue twice, continued to scrutinize the Chung Yu in my painting, and could not refrain from remarking. Why does this person appear so lifeless? Not like a living being but rather like a still life. This is precisely how Chung Yu strikes me, like a cat immersed in darkness, with only the sun in his eyes. He also yearns to escape from the darkness and hopes that good fortune will befall him. 8. On Friday, Chung Yu was hospitalized. I learned of this from the brain specialist, who stated that if Chung Yu did not undergo surgery again this time, he might not survive for more than 3 months. I inquired of him why Chung Yu refrained from having the surgery. He replied, because the probability of success is a mere 10%. When I visited Chung Yu, I purchased a bouquet of flowers and jested with him in a light-hearted manner. Chung Yu also smiled in response, yet for the most part he gazed at the sky outside. He said, I believe I am fortunate, yet it is a pity that the hospital does not permit cats. I inquired of him solicitously, do you have other relatives here? I desired to ascertain what decision they had reached regarding Chung Yu's surgery. Chung Yu turned around and smiled at me, and the smile was replete with reluctance. I have no relatives. I was the sole survivor of the car accident 3 years ago. Now I am departing as well. He still stared out the window, and the sunlight pierced through layers of obstructions to embrace him and caress the corners of his eyes and hair. The lad was pallid and emaciated, like an iris on the verge of withering. I felt a sense of reluctance in my heart, yet in his presence, any words I uttered seemed impotent. I frequented Chung Yu's bedside. In the first week, he could accompany me outdoors to bask in the sun. In the second week, he was confined to a wheelchair, spitting out copious mouthfuls of blood. In the third week, Chung Yu's hair was shaved off. He reclined on the bed and smiled feebly at me, inquiring of me what I desired most in life. I pondered it meticulously, yet discovered that there was naught I yearned to do. Chung Yu did not concern himself with my lack of an answer. He bestowed upon me a set of keys and an address. Please tend to Lucky on my behalf. When I fetched Lucky that night, it was huddled beside the mobile camera, where Chung Yu could behold it as long as he activated the camera. Lucky be good. Lucky meowed at me twice, its voice hoarse, as if it had called out to me innumerable times. It could not locate Chung Yu, and thus could only safeguard him in the sole place where it could hear his voice. 9. The following day I removed Xieji from the blacklist. Our divorce cooling-off period had elapsed, and we could officially finalize the divorce. My appointment was slated for 9 o'clock, and Xieji arrived a trifle later. His attire was no longer as exquisite, and he appeared somewhat dejected. When he beheld me, his eyes brightened marginally, and then dimmed once more. I witnessed him approaching, pivoted around and intended to leave, yet my arm was seized by Xieji. I could not extricate myself and regarded him with a furrowed brow. Xieji's eyelashes quivered and he inquired of me in a hoarse voice. Chen Yuanyun, do you no longer desire me? My back stiffened instantaneously, and my chest felt as if it had been lacerated by a blade, the pain searing through my bones. I had truly loved Xieji. No more. I suppressed my voice and replied to him. Xieji, I no longer desire you. Concomitant with this utterance, the past decade between him and me came flooding back. It was him donning a school uniform, seated in the sun, carelessly dribbling a basketball, smiling and saying to me, Chen Yuanyun, why are you so tardy? If you did not arrive, to whom would I display my prowess? It was him propping up his chin, observing the rows of teachers departing work downstairs, tilting his head and smiling at me. Chen Yuanyun, do you wish to partake of sizzling spicy hot pot after school? It was him leaning against the wall, looking aggrieved and saying to me, "Chen Yuanyu, I seem to be on the verge of death. Recall that there is a dollar tucked within the 27th page of my compulsory math book. That is all my worldly possessions. Cough. Why did you strike me?" It was him blushing and kneeling on one knee before me in a sea of flowers. "Chen Yuanyuan, you will be my everything from this moment onward." It was the clock ticking as he returned home later and later after marriage. The message, "I feel so wretched. Can you come and keep me company?" That illuminated his phone screen when he held me and envisioned the future. It was the mounting ennui in his eyes and the dwindling number of words he uttered to me. It was the lame excuse he fabricated on my birthday to accompany another person. The company's cat was ailing and required someone to attend to it. This is our decade. The decade during which my jade-like lad and I drifted apart. I suddenly shed 2 rivulets of tears. "Xieji, I no longer desire you." 10. After procuring the divorce certificate, I got rid of Xieji who still wanted to pester me, and on the way to visit Changyu, I bought a bouquet of flowers. At the elevator entrance of the hospital, I met Moku, a brain specialist. He saw me, raised his eyebrows, smiled and said, "Miss Chun, do you remember me this time?" I remember him. Half a year ago, when I was sure that Xieji had changed his mind, I was depressed and anorexic, and finally fainted on the roadside and was sent to the hospital by a kind boy. When I woke up, the boy was sitting by the window, basking in the sun quietly. He smiled and stretched out his hand to me. "Hello, my name is Chungyu, you means long-term illness. I also have a cat named Lucky." At that time he was just thin and looked malnourished, but his eyes were always bright like the sun. I was forced to be hospitalized for observation due to moderate depression and severe anorexia. It happened that Xieji was on a business trip at that time and was busy with various social activities. He didn't know that I was in the hospital. In the first week I curled up in a corner, not eating or drinking, and relied on infusion all day to maintain. I often cried in the middle of the night, and sometimes after taking medicine and going to bed, I would look at the corner and cry for no reason. Changyu often came to see me, bringing freshly picked flowers from the roadside, drawing the curtains to dispel the haze in the room. In the second week, he introduced his attending physician to me. That person was Moku. He minored in psychology and got a master's degree. He was best at influencing a person's psychology through the language environment I in his presence. I invariably become more composed. After nearly half a month of treatment, he interlaced his fingers and smiled benignly. "I comprehend why Miss Chun is in such agony. The partner who supported me in my youth ultimately fell for someone else. What Miss Chun cannot relinquish is no longer that person, but merely the lad from the past. Why not forsake the memories of bygone days and reevaluate the individuals in your current vicinity? Determine whether it is still worthy of Miss Chen's retrospection. How about it?" My mind was in a daze and I could scarcely hear his words, yet I knew that perhaps this was my sole means of escape. In the ensuing 6 months, Moku administered a series of psychological suggestions and employed certain medications to cause me to truly forget Xieji temporarily. He said, "When Miss Chun is resolute in abandoning, these memories will be restored." Thus, one day upon awakening, I had lost my memory. I remembered everyone save him. 11. I entered the elevator and smiled in response to Moku. "Thank you." The elevator door gradually closed, and only the 2 of us occupied the confined space. Moku tilted his head to regard me, his formal smile waned, and his eyes brimmed with fanaticism. I ought to express my gratitude. Miss Chun is an exceptionally fine experimental specimen. I was cognizant that Moku was utilizing me for experiments, yet I remained deeply grateful to him. I emerged from the gloom and ultimately let go of the past, all thanks to him. However, all of this could not alter the fact that he was an academic zealot who employed living beings as experimental materials. I had no inclination to become overly embroiled with Moku, and thus I refrained from replying to him. After Moku posed a few additional questions and perceived my lack of interest, he also grew weary and ceased speaking, until the elevator door opened and I readied myself to disembark. "Miss Chun." I glanced back at Moku, who stood in the shadows, and his countenance was once again adorned with that formulaic and benevolent smile. Changyu consented to the operation. I was overjoyed, nodded in acknowledgement and expressed my gratitude, and promptly hastened to Changyu's ward. When I entered, Changyu was huddled in a chair by the window, and the sun gradually bathed him, warming his entire being. I removed the withered flowers from the vase and replaced them with the sunflowers I had brought that day. I retrieved the spray bottle and spritzed some water upon them. Gazing at the water droplets adorning the petals, I could not help but smile and remark, "You truly resemble a sunflower. You both relish basking in the sun." Changyu half opened his eyes, his breath feeble. I agreed to the operation. "If I am fortunate enough to survive, please assist me in painting a sunrise in Lhasa." When I was despondent, Changyu mentioned this matter, yet I subsequently forgot about it, and it never came to fruition. I felt a trifle guilty. "When you recuperate, I shall escort you to Lhasa to witness the sunrise in person." He closed his eyes and did not respond again, as if he was exceedingly fatigued. Changyu's operation was slated for the afternoon of the following day. Before he entered the operating room, he bestowed a small embrace upon me. His final words were, "Chun Yuan, remember me." My eyes were somewhat reddened, and I patted his back to console him. "You are still youthful. You will assuredly be extremely fortunate." He smiled at me, closed his eyes and remained silent. The operation endured for 8 hours. I awaited outside the operating room until the evening before departing to feed Xingyun. "Chengyu has Xingyun and he will surely be all right." Xingyun seemed to be cognizant of Changyu's situation. He refused to consume anything and lay motionless in front of the camera. At 9 o'clock I was poised to resume my vigil beside Chungyun, yet Xingyun suddenly commenced wailing. It was the first occasion on which I beheld a cat shrieking at the top of its lungs. He incessantly rubbed his head against the camera, yet the cold machine would never offer him perpetual solace. My heart trembled. 10 minutes later, I received a message from Imoku. Apologies. I could not refrain from weeping in the car. The recollection of Changyu sitting in the sun to keep me company during my period of depression emerged. I bit the back of my hand and endeavored with all my might to suppress my sobs. He said, I have no family and no friends. If I depart, no one will remember me. Chunyuan, you must remember me. I'm sorry that I forgot you. I'm sorry, Chungyu. I staggered to the hospital and in a trance beheld Chungyu once more. He stood in the light and extended his hand to me. Hello, my name is Chungyu. You denoting one who has been ailing for a long time. Chungyu no longer had Xingyun, and Xingyun also lost Chungyu. 12. Chungyu had no kin, and thus I oversaw his funeral arrangements. Chungyu possessed very few possessions, and the most precious of them was a cat named Lucky. After weathering the initial few nights, I regarded Lucky basking in the sun and reached a decision. I tendered my resignation. When Jolie learned of this, she was incredulous. Chan Yuan, even in the absence of love, we can still conduct business. Why would you even relinquish your career? I smiled at her and said, I wish to fulfill a pledge. I was planning to embark on a journey to Tibet by car to paint a sunrise for Changyu. However, I am not proficient in landscape painting. I am more adept at portrait painting. Hence, prior to my departure, I visited Xiaosu. I was willing to exhaust all my savings and engage him to accompany me to Tibet to paint a sunrise. Jolie failed to comprehend my actions, believing that I was willing to forsake everything I presently possessed for an inexplicable rendezvous. Xiaji was equally bemused. He had purchased the studio where I worked without my knowledge, and upon hearing that I had resigned, he promptly drove over to inquire. I was pondering why my monthly salary had doubled despite my unexplained absence from work. It transpired that Xiaji had taken over the studio. Xiaji knitted his brows and spoke rapidly. If it was on my account, you need not resign. I can promptly transfer this studio to you. He counseled me. Chun Yuan, do not be impetuous. I regarded him placidly, observing the passage of his youthful years through his hair, and I inquired of him. Xiaji, why did you acquire this studio? Xiaji was engaged in the information software industry. How could a studio that was neither renowned nor highly profitable suddenly capture his attention? Xiaji gradually lowered his head and spoke in a subdued voice. I desire to make amends to you to the best of my ability. He seemed to realize that he had uttered something amiss and immediately amended his statement. Naturally, I am aware that I cannot atone for the harm I inflicted upon you previously, but— Very well, I interrupted him. I have no desire to listen to your self-indulgent confession, and you need not be so self-absorbed. I did not resign because of you. Xiaji was stupefied. Why is that? I raised my head to regard the sky, and the dark clouds that had amassed for several days finally dispersed. The sun pierced through the clouds and descended upon the world. The geese flew by singing, leaving behind a rent sky. My mood abruptly improved. I have no inclination to linger in the past. I yearn to behold the future, a future devoid of you. After uttering these words, Xiaosu also packed his belongings and emerged. I pivoted around and waved to him. Xiaosu, are you capable of driving? Xiaosu lowered his head and murmured a single word to me. Yes. I was overjoyed and pulled Xiaosu to seat himself in the car I had purchased previously but had never had the opportunity to drive. Xiaji stood there, observing me gradually recede into the distance and ultimately vanish from sight. Jolie folded her arms across her chest, clicked her tongue twice and remarked sarcastically. The individual who wallows in the past is now journeying towards the future, and the person who initially abandoned the past is now ruminating on it once more. What an irony! Xiaji was not as forbearing towards Jolie. His countenance suddenly turned frigid, and he demanded of her. Are you deriding me? Oh, your glare is truly fierce. Jolie laughed twice and flung the resignation letter into Xiaji's face. I resign. I am no longer intimidated by you. I wish that you may live out your life in solitude and never cross paths with Chun Yuan again. Thereafter she walked away. Xiaji remained standing there and sighed for an extended period. Naturally, he would never encounter Chun Yuan again. Chun Yuan no longer held any affection for him. All of this was his own doing. 13. No longer concerning myself with Xiaji, Xiaosu and I drove all the way to Tibet. Xingyun was not averse to traveling by car. Instead, like a curious infant, he would lean against the car window each day to behold the scenery outside. Your cat is truly endearing. Xiaosu and I grew increasingly acquainted with each other, and he began to embrace my jests and on occasion, he would even take the initiative to recount a few amusing anecdotes. He had always been mildly autistic, and the magnificent landscapes along the way gradually healed him. Xingyun is my friend's cat, his cherished possession. Xiaosu gleaned a modicum of information about Chengyu from me, and he also sympathized with the lad who relished basking in the sun. Hearing my words, he immediately changed the topic, fearing that he would once more plunge me into melancholy. On the day when Xiaosu and I entered Tibet, we could not help but alight from the car and shout. Xiaosu's reaction was even more exuberant than mine. He promptly retrieved the easel from the trunk and then commenced painting the distant mountains. I snapped a few photographs with my camera, then idly opened the easel, surveyed the surroundings and began to paint Chengyu. I had been engaged in painting this portrait for half a month, incessantly revising it, and had even torn it up and started anew on 7 occasions, yet regardless of how I painted, I remained dissatisfied. In my recollection, Changyu was gentle, a lad who leaned against the sun. I painted the first encounter between him and me at the station after I had lost my memory, and he extended his hand and smiled at me benignly. I painted the occasion when he was despondent and escorted me to the hospital, and the smile he wore when I awoke. I also painted the time when he was gravely ill, curled up in a chair with his eyes closed, basking in the sun. However, I was dissatisfied with each of them and always felt that something was amiss. Xiaosu lauded the drawings I had torn up, asserting that I was merely being overly exacting with myself and that it was merely a trifling flaw, and thus I could simply make a minor concession. I firmly informed him, Changyu cannot be compromised. In this world I am the sole individual who can remember him, and I absolutely cannot make concessions. Xiaosu failed to comprehend, yet he did not attempt to persuade me again. Half a month later, Xiaosu and I transported the easel to await the sunrise in front of the Potala Palace in the early hours. The night in Tibet was chilly, and Xiaosu brought me an additional coat and said to me, "You may slumber for a while. I shall rouse you when the sun rises." I shook my head and thanked him for his kindness. The wait for the sunrise was excessively tedious, and even Xiaosu could not endure the ennui and took the initiative to recount a jest. Do you know why Christ never perused Buddhist scriptures in his lifetime? Because he could not speak Chinese. His joke was even more insipid, yet Xiaosu's expectant gaze upon me was more comical. After an extended period of interaction, I discovered that Xiaosu was like a child, fond of childish toys, confections, and recounting dull jests. He and I grew increasingly close, and he began to address me as Sister Yuan Yuan. I still called him Xiaosu, yet I treated him with ever-increasing solicitude, as if he were my younger brother. 14. An increasing number of people were awaiting the sunrise, yet the sun was like a bashful maiden, reluctant to make an appearance. Xiaosu yawned twice, and the pen in his hand tumbled to the ground. The sun had yet to rise, and the visibility remained extremely low. I followed the sound to locate the pen that had rolled I knew not where. There were numerous individuals congregated in the square. I lowered my head and searched between my feet. Xiaosu was only partial to using the pen with which he was familiar. If he lost that pen, he would be deeply aggrieved. The moment I retrieved the pen, I heard exclamations from above my head. I stood up, pen in hand, and could not refrain from exclaiming. The resplendent maiden in a golden gauze skirt leaped out from the layers of verdant mountains, casting the first beam of benedictory light upon the world, which was reflected by the golden roof of the Potala Palace, suffused with peace and sanctity. Some individuals in the crowd knelt to recite scriptures, some clasped their hands in prayer, and some picked up their pens and regarded the morning sun with sincerity. I finally realized what had been lacking in the paintings of Changyu. Changyu is a gift. I retrieved the pen and commenced painting. I had painted Changyu on numerous occasions of late. I raised my hand to swiftly paint his eyebrows and eyes and painted a crimson golden radiance around him beneath the red sun. What I painted was the final encounter between him and me. He half raised his hand in a hugging gesture, with a gentle smile and a tinge of regret in his eyes. I also painted a blooming iris on his right hand. When Xiaosu completed his painting of the sunrise, he took a gander at my painting. Is he Changyu? He is truly distinct. I was somewhat astonished and inquired, what is different? Xiaosu knitted his brows and scrutinized my painting for an extended period. Finally, he said in a perplexed manner, well, I merely felt that he was exceedingly gentle before, but now he is warm and gentle like basking in the sun. I nodded. Xiaosu showed me the sunrise he had painted, which was nearly identical to the scene that had just transpired and even more artistic. With this painting he might achieve renown. Xiaosu did not seem to care. He nonchalantly handed the painting to me. I promised you that I would paint the sunrise for you. I ultimately declined the painting and left you for Xiaosu. With his permission, I photographed his painting and posted it online. Xiaosu achieved overnight fame. Some of his previous paintings were also unearthed, and some even proposed to hold an exhibition for him, with the sunrise painting slated to be placed in the center. Xiaosu came to seek my counsel, and I responded to him. If feasible, please include healing in your exhibition. I hope more people can remember him. I recall there was an exceedingly gentle lad named Changyu, which means healing. He also possessed a cat named Lucky. Xiaosu's exhibition was an astounding success. When we returned, Jolie had relocated. She had journeyed to the capital to seek her livelihood. When I conversed with her about her long-distance relationship, Jolie replied with great aplomb. She said, Chen Yuan, if he truly loves me, even if thousands of miles separate us, even if there is only the voice on the phone, it cannot quell his yearning. If he does not love me, Chen Yuan, this is not termed a long-distance relationship. This is akin to finding a foreign paramour for oneself, merely to vent one's spleen. Jolie had always been acerbic, and I could not help but laugh heartily and collapse onto the bed. I recounted to her about Xiaosu once more. Xiaosu's paintings were now highly sought after. The highest price for Sunrise had soared to 70 million. I heard that many had proffered exorbitant prices for my healing. Xiaosu, acting on my behalf and in accordance with my instructions, spurned all offers and even placed a small placard beside the painting, inscribing Changyu's name and his words. Xingyun was growing increasingly corpulent. He frequently slumbered in the plush cat bed and only emerged to bask in the sun when there was sunshine. When I summoned him for a meal, he sprinted with great alacrity, as if he had wings. I remained engaged in painting, and my life was uneventful yet content. Time was as gentle as water, gradually alleviating the pain. 15. The next occasion on which I beheld Xiaji was at Xiao Su's celebration banquet. At that time, Xiao Su had already become a highly renowned painter. He had been invited to attend his celebration banquet. Unable to decline and yet apprehensive of crowded gatherings, he had no alternative but to come and implore me to accompany him. After more than a year, Xiaji had metamorphosed considerably. He had become more poised and mature. He donned a dark suit, and his meticulously groomed hair and delicate facial features rendered him the cynosure of all eyes, regardless of where he stood. I merely cast a cursory glance at him, and then swiveled my head to continue observing the other denizens of the venue. I espied Emoku within the throng. He was attired in a white suit, and his hair was unkempt, endowing him with an air of nonchalance. He raised his glass to me, and I reciprocated. I beheld your painting. Emoku curved his lips. If he were still extant, he would assuredly be most fond of it. I clinked glasses with him and replied, if it were he would surely laud my painting skills directly and then celebrate with me. Emoku smiled enigmatically and remained silent. I espied Xiao Su quivering with his glass in the midst of the venue. He surveyed his surroundings and beamed at me when he caught sight of me. I returned his smile. Emoku suddenly clinked glasses with me again. I raised my eyes to regard him, and he smiled at me with his face half-turned. Miss Chun, I wonder if you would be interested in a while. I have no interest, I interjected. Emoku, I have no interest in you. I had no inclination for an academic zealot who would even disregard human lives for the sake of experiments. The smile in Emoku's eyes deepened. He set down the wine glass and gently caressed the watch on his wrist. Just as I was speculating whether he was about to administer another psychological hint to me, he suddenly laughed. Miss Chun, it appears you have guests, so I shall not impose upon you further. After which, he pivoted and departed. Oh, is this not Miss Chun? A shrill voice abruptly interrupted. I swiveled my head to behold the newcomer, and my brows could not help but furrow. I had espied her from afar. She was the object of Xiaji's infidelity, Zheng Ling, a vacuous beauty in my estimation, possessing only superficial charm but bereft of intellect. She was Xiaji's secretary. During the interview, she had made a most unfavorable impression on me. She had forgotten the time, been careless, and mislaid things. I could not enumerate her flaws on a single hand. However, she also had one redeeming quality that I was compelled to acknowledge, that she was invariably sanguine. Even if the path ahead was obscure, she had the temerity to traverse it alone. Perhaps Xiaji was enamored of this trait of hers. I was in no mood to engage in conversation with the erstwhile paramour at my brother's celebration soirée. I did not even deign to heed her provocative remarks. My eyes alighted on her fleetingly and then swiftly averted, for fear of contaminating my vision. Zheng Ling was seeking trouble and was about to utter something further. At this juncture Xiaji approached, interposed himself between her and me, raised his glass and smiled at me. How have you been of late? I replied to him with equanimity. Keep your distance, thank you. He did not alter his expression, pushed Zheng Ling aside, and changed the topic to continue conversing with me. I beheld that painting. It is truly remarkable. You have been proficient in portrait painting since high school. And this time it is truly astonishing. Bereft of love, I regarded Xiaji as if he were a bothersome gadfly, and I yearned to slap him and bid him keep his distance from me. However, I could not do so. I could only smile at him sardonically. Hey Mr. Xie, have you made the paramour official? Xiaji's countenance suddenly darkened, and Zheng Ling incessantly inquired who the paramour was. I stepped past Xiaji and raised my voice to reply to her. When Mr. Xie and I were husband and wife, you were Mr. Xie's paramour. If you are not the third party, then are you the fourth party? The sound of people around pointing fingers at Zheng Ling made me feel a flush of heat. Xiaji was no exception. He peremptorily instructed Zheng Ling to depart, and explained to all present that they were merely superiors and subordinates. I stood aside and watched the spectacle, finding it highly amusing. I could perceive clearly that he was shielding Zheng Ling. Xiaji, what is it about her that you find appealing? Xiaji lowered his voice. I am not protecting her. I am protecting you. 16. Protect me. I laughed and endeavored strenuously to restrain my hands, scarcely averting the spilling of wine upon his face. Was he dreaming? What preposterous nonsense was he spouting? Xiaji did not respond to my query. He advanced a few steps closer to me, lowered his head and inquired of me in a hushed tone. I knew you would surely come today. I merely desired. His tone was feeble, and he vacillated for an extended period without uttering a word. However, I was intrigued by the first half of his sentence. He averred that he knew I would surely come. This celebration banquet was indeed attended by him. I could not abide his coyness and thus inquired. Xiaji, do you wish to revert to the past with me? He immediately raised his head, his eyes brimming with hope, and regarded me expectantly. I laughed and then dashed the wine upon his face. First, he was embroiled in a mistress scandal, and then he was doused with wine by his ex-wife. Regardless, Xiaji's reputation would assuredly plummet to its nadir in the future. Some of his business orders might be lost as a consequence, but what did Xiaji's losses have to do with me? I replied to him frigidly. What you yearn for is not me, but the you who once shone brightly in my eyes. I placed the cup on the table beside me and wiped my fingers with a tissue. Cease to disgust me, Xiaji. I pivoted to depart, and Xiao Su promptly followed me. As we passed by Xiaji, he also splashed wine on Xiaji's face. He also left a parting shot. Since Mr. Xie has a bevy of paramours, do not expect the goodness of a pearl. Xiaji did not utter another word. He stood in the arena like a drenched cur. Xiao Su drove me for a spin, and I raised my arms to embrace the night and a new self. The night is never the fount of pain. It is those who refuse to perceive themselves clearly who are. End of full text.